What's going on, everybody? Happy Friday. Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Stop what you're doing right now. Drop a like on this video. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here. We've got game recaps, Heat news, trade rumors, and more, all right here on the channel Monday through Friday. And capping off today's episode, we got a recap of last night's loss against the Spurs as Miami fell to San Antonio 107-101. Now 3-2 on the regular season. The Spurs 5-0, kind of showing that they are probably going to be the real deal, at least in the Western Conference. Victor Wembanyama making another solid case for potentially being the MVP of the league this year, I think, in this game. Boasting 18 rebounds in this game to go along with 27 points and 6 assists. Mind you, I believe he had 5 blocks in this game. So, I mean, when you're going up against a 7'4" center with an 8-foot wingspan, I mean, you're going to block some shots, you're going to grab some rebounds, and you're definitely going to score some points. It was looking like he was playing some mini hoop basketball out there, or at least looked like he was playing on a mini hoop in somebody's college dorm room. So he kind of looked like that in some spurts of tonight's game. But I think overall, Bam Adebayo was able to kind of hold his own, especially in this matchup against Victor Wembanyama one-on-one. Also having a great game. I'm going to get into that a little bit later in this episode. But holding Wembanyama to only 6 points in the first quarter. And then obviously he kind of got himself going throughout the rest of the game, eventually getting the Spurs up to a 15-point lead at one point in this game. And quite honestly, there were especially after the third quarter where Miami only scored 14 points in that quarter. It really looked like the game was pretty much over for Miami, but a 15-0 run to kind of start the fourth quarter really put Miami back into this matchup despite not necessarily playing as fast as I feel like we've seen in the first 4 games prior to this. The fast break not really going. The overall pace I feel like wasn't there in comparison to especially the matchup against the Hornets, the Knicks, and the Grizzlies. So I think at least defensively, the Spurs did a very good job against Miami and making that really forcing them to slow down their game, because especially in the beginning of the game, I felt like a lot of passes were kind of being intercepted. I felt like a lot of shots were being thrown off so that they were taken relatively uncomfortably. And although Miami was able to get back on defense, I feel like decently well, the Spurs capitalizing on a lot of those second chance points, especially when they needed it in the fourth quarter. Stephon Castle also had a really solid game in this matchup with 4 steals to go along with 21 points and 6 assists, 7-12 shooting for the former Rookie of the Year. So he also had a really good game. And I think although Wembanyama stuffed the stat sheet, and whoever had him in fantasy last night, and congratulations, you're probably going to win this week. But in the grand scheme of things, I think Castle really helped also contribute to the defensive effort that really kept the Spurs out front for, I feel like, more of the game at least than the Heat were in, or at least in general. But also in terms of statistical category, in terms of major stats, the Spurs really, I feel like, kind of had the upper hand against the Heat. Definitely taking more trips to the line really helped them as they shot 17 of 23. Miami only 8 of 11. So they didn't really do a great job of getting to the line overall in this matchup. In terms of the field goal percentage, they were both pretty much neck and neck. Both teams shooting around 43 to 44% from the field. So both of them at least putting the clamps on each other to some regard in a similar way. But the Spurs capitalizing on a lot of those second chance points and impact plays more than Miami is why I think they were able to get out on top. Unfortunately, despite Miami going on a late run in the fourth quarter and really surging their way back, being up, I believe, 89-88 with 7 minutes left in the contest, ultimately letting this game kind of get away from them. The other thing that I want to touch on that I had mentioned in the preview, the rebound battle, Miami lost overall 48-41, and on the offensive glass 9-5. And I think when you kind of look at that, it's definitely a big reason why I think Miami was so narrowly close to not just potentially winning the game at certain points, but also ultimately lost, because I had mentioned if they lose the rebounding battle, they're almost definitely going to lose this game, especially because we had seen in the other games prior those battles pretty close, but because Miami was able to get out and get quicker baskets and really kind of build momentum and really keep out in front rather than have to battle back in a lot of points of the game, I think that is really what the difference maker was. And unfortunately, because they, although they did a relatively decent job of boxing out the 7'4", 8-foot wingspan center and Victor Wembanyama, I think that that was ultimately what gave the Spurs the edge and really was kind of on top of, or was one of the main reasons why they won, on top of kind of, really the last 5 minutes of them kind of owning Miami, forcing really silly turnovers. And then Miami, when they were able to get a stop, kind of holding them from scoring and then countering on the other end of the floor. So the momentum, I feel like, in the last 6 to 5 minutes of the fourth quarter was in favor of the Spurs. And because I feel like they got a little bit stagnant, like I feel like we typically see from the Miami Heat, despite how this team has really been playing a lot different through the really grand scheme of the course of the regular season so far, they weren't really able to at least show that off for the entirety of the second half, especially in the third quarter. And that was what really did Miami in, I think, in this matchup. But definitely some positives to take away from this team. Bam Adebayo and Simone Fontecchio being two that I really want to talk more about. Bam Adebayo really stepped up in the absence of, obviously, Tyler Herro, but also Norman Powell not being in the starting lineup tonight. He had 31 points in this game off 12 of 27 shooting, so not great, but also not terrible. Also having 10 rebounds, going toe-to-toe with Wembanyama under the basket. And I cannot believe the lack of excitement initially on the broadcast when Adebayo had that poster slam on Wembanyama winding down in the second quarter. I mean, talk about putting the Bam in a tomahawk highlight dunk. If that's not on SportsCenter top 10 over the next couple of days, I mean, quite honestly, I might be a little biased, but that's absolutely ridiculous. It was an insane dunk. You should definitely go on Miami Heat's Instagram account and check it out if you haven't seen it. But this man cocked it back and absolutely threw down a hammer on Wembanyama. And it was definitely a great dunk that gave Miami at least some momentum coming out of the half, considering they were down at that point. And although they didn't really keep it going in the third quarter, unfortunately, was definitely a great highlight play from one of the cornerstone players for Miami that was definitely worth touching on. And then Simone Fontecchio continuing to shoot the lights out as an elite catch-and shooter from beyond the arc off the bench for Miami. 5 of 7 from 3. 18 points off 28 minutes played. I mean, he was by far the biggest difference maker for Miami off the bench. They had 4 players in double figures tonight. Davion Mitchell with 11, Andrew Wiggins had 24 with 11 to 18 shooting, but he also, I feel like, took some time to get ramped up and going throughout this game. I mean, he took nearly 20 shots, and I feel like in the first half wasn't really making any that at least kind of helped Miami build a lead in some way, shape, or form. But the shots he was able to hit in the second half definitely kind of helped Miami surge back in this game. So, but I'm getting off the beaten horse a little bit in terms of, obviously, Adebayo, Wiggins, and Mitchell being those other 3 players that scored in double figures. But Fontecchio's 18 off the bench was a huge difference maker for Miami, hitting very impactful threes when it mattered. I mean, pretty much every time he released the ball, I almost thought it was going to go in just because of how hot of a hand he was kind of able to develop, at least in this game. And I cannot believe that Miami was considering waiving this guy after acquiring him in that deal for Duncan Robinson with the Pistons over the summer. I mean, he has just shown that his ceiling exceeds anybody's expectations that they had, at least over the summer, when the question marks of who is this guy that is necessarily coming in, what he could potentially be. I mean, definitely showed remnants of being a solid outside scorer, but to this regard, I definitely would say it's taken a lot of Miami Heat fans by surprise in a good way. So I'm hoping that it's going to at least keep it coming from Fontecchio, because he shot the lights out once again in this game. He shot the lights out against the Hornets as well, and was also pretty lethal from beyond the arc against the Knicks. But the fact that he scored nearly 20 off the bench, and 15 of those, or a majority of the points really came from beyond the arc, was a very exciting and promising thing to watch. So I'm excited to see how he's going to continue to capitalize off the course of over the course of the rest of the regular season, going into the next couple of months. But I'm hoping this is not just a little teaser of, maybe just a couple hot games, and this is a little bit more of a consistent expectation we can kind of see from him coming off the bench night in and night out. And then moving over to some performances that were rather disappointing, that I think if maybe were a little bit polished up, could have potentially helped Miami get in the win column in this one. The two performances from Jaime Jaquez Jr. and Kel'el Ware were rather disappointing, just considering how Jaquez Jr. has been able to play over the course of the first 4 games going into this matchup. And then Ware, I feel like, especially how he played in the preseason, the talks about him having to develop, how high his ceiling has been to potentially be an all-star on the team. I mean, the fact that he had 0 points off 0 of 4 shooting in this game, quite honestly, especially having him in the starting lineup, is unacceptable. Where, unfortunately, looked a little bit lazy, especially on defense. I feel like at times watching Wembanyama kind of go to the basket, granted, had 7 rebounds, so was at least contributing in some regard to that, to at least that part of Miami's game. But when you don't have your leading scorer, your 2 leading scorers in Harrow and Powell in the lineup, I mean, this was a guy who was dominant off the pick and roll in the preseason, clearly has the potential to score 23, 25, maybe 30 points a game on a given night in certain scenarios, and hasn't even really shown any sort of remnants of that convincingly over the course of the regular season kind of to start so far, but more especially in this game. And if you're going to do it, you might as well do it while you're matching up against one of the game's best bigs. Granted, I understand going up against a 7'4" center with an 8-foot wingspan who's making a very valuable candidate to punch their ticket for the MVP, or really to win the MVP this season, and Victor Wembanyama is a hard player to match up against. But when you've got Bam Adebayo to work alongside you in your backcourt, I mean, unfortunately, Miami, I feel like, wasn't playing as well in transition, and their pace wasn't kind of what we've seen over these first 4 games prior to this matchup against the Spurs. But I feel like he kind of just contributed to slowing down the game for Miami, not really shooting the ball well in this game either. And his, in my opinion, 0 points is unacceptable compared to Jaquez's overall performance that, quite honestly, wasn't really exciting to watch either. Granted, Jaquez Jr. really having a solid performance in these first 4 games leading up to this, averaging around 18 points per game. But granted, he had 6 points in this game, shooting 2 of 8 from the field. And quite honestly, if he had more points than the amount of times I got his name wrong in the last episode, granted, who knows? We maybe would have won the game. But kidding aside, I mean, he didn't really, this was by far his worst game of the season. He didn't really play well. Jaime Jaquez Jr. really not doing anything offensively, I feel like, in this game. The player we had seen, especially against the Hornets, bringing the ball up, taking aggressive drives to the basket, decent mid-range shooting, especially in these last 2 games, not just including the Hornets or the matchup against the Hornets, but I mean, that was not the player we saw. I feel like we kind of saw more remnants of how he played in the preseason. And again, the preseason doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. I know that definitely, I understand that, but he looked stagnant. He didn't look comfortable. He couldn't really get a lot of his shots to fall. Granted, he took a similar amount of shots in this matchup than he kind of has been in a lot of the other games, but I feel like Wembanyama was definitely a disruptor for him, kind of forcing him to not really take shots he was more comfortable taking. He did get his shots blocked a couple times. I mean, Wembanyama had 5 blocks in the game, and at least one of them came on Jaquez Jr. But yeah, I mean, he just did not look how he's been looking, at least through these first 4 games prior to this one against the Spurs. And it was disappointing to see him not kind of step up when we have been seeing him step up, especially like I had just mentioned in the matchup earlier this week. So I feel like if those 2 guys played a lot better, Miami could have definitely won this game just because of how they were able to surge late, and because Wiggins was also kind of able to get going late. I mean, if those players stepped up, Miami could have, I think, easily had won this game, maybe, 112, 115 to 109, 111, but who knows? We'll just kind of have to wait and see, and we'll have to see how Miami can adapt if the pace of how they want to play kind of gets slowed up a little bit, like we had kind of saw in this matchup against the Spurs. But now looking over next to Miami's matchup, they're going to stay on the road over the course of this weekend as they're facing off against the Los Angeles Lakers on Sunday. Drop in the comments what score predictions you have, because Austin Reeves is coming off a really solid 116 to 115 victory against against the Minnesota Timberwolves, excuse me. He had 28 in that game to go along with 16 assists. So I think if Miami can kind of reduce his ability to facilitate to a lot of guys off the bench, or a lot of guys in the starting rotation like DeAndre Ayton and Hachimura, then I think that they can potentially put the clamps on him there. But if they can also keep the ball out of his hands, kind of forcing a lot of the other players on this team to have to step up and score, Miami will definitely be able to run more of the fast-paced play that we've seen at least in these 4 games prior to this matchup against the Spurs that I'm talking about from last night. So again, drop in the comments what your score predictions are going to be. I have Miami winning this one 127 to 119. I think Miami is going to be able to bring back that fast-paced, quick transition type of play that we had seen, especially against the Hornets, against the Knicks, and of course against the Grizzlies. So it'll be interesting to see how this younger Lakers team can maybe adapt to trying to slow Miami down. But I think Wembanyama and then Castle also being a really solid two-way option definitely slowed Miami's offense and how they wanted to play. And even though Miami was kind of good at least getting back on the defensive front, I think that because they were able to capitalize on so many second chance points, that was why the Spurs were able to resurge back on top despite Miami getting a late 15-0 run in the fourth quarter. But that's going to do it for this Friday's episode of Your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Thanks again so much for joining us. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great weekend.